fundamental cornerstone of a lot of religious beliefs are coming from these super ancient ancestors that left behind records for us to discern and to pay attention to today.
A few years ago, I took the time to go through the Bible, beginning in the book of Genesis, and just noting some of the anomalies and the stories that we tell from those texts. There are certain things in those texts that don't fit with our familiar Christian and Jewish stories. And when I treated them as translation questions and went to the root meanings of the key words, I recognized that what I was looking at was a summary form of the Mesopotamian stories. And where I found those overlaps, they were almost all points of trauma. So planetary catastrophe occurs in both canons. The generation of human beings and the hybridization of human beings with other more advanced beings, it's in both canons. Arguments among these powerful non-human entities about the human population, how big it should be, how long they should live, how healthy they should be, what access they should have to foods, medicines, water, occurs in both canons. Conflicts among the colonizing non-humans, both canons. Carving up the lands so that they're now managed by non-humans and served by the humans, both canons. On and on it goes. Flood narrative, recovery from the flood. It's all there, these repetitions. And when I saw the repetitions, it was easy for me to see which telling of the story had come first, and to see that the biblical was a summary of the earlier, and that the earlier was a story of a multiplicity of beings interacting with humanity, and it had been boiled down into what now looks like a God story. And as I looked at these traumas that seem to be recalled by both canons, I realized those same traumas are reported by other cultures all around the world that have nothing to do with the Middle East, that have nothing to do with ancient Mesopotamia or Proto-Hebrew literature. You can go to the Yucatan Peninsula, you can go to the Nordic countries, you can go into Africa, into Greece, into India, and the same traumas are described. Different names of characters, different metaphors told, but the same events are being recalled. And a classic example of this can be found in the story of the Bible itself. Now, before the 8th century BCE, Judaism was a canon of memory of paleo contact. The Hebrew stories were full of stories of diverse entities who came, some to help us and nurture us, some to conquer, colonize, and exploit us as a working class. All those stories were washing around in the Hebrew stories until a king came along called Hezekiah, and he worshipped a being called Yahweh. And he was one of these beings, one of the Elohim, as the Bible calls them. And he had a high priest, a Yahwist high priest, Hilkiah, who I think sidled along to him one day, and I'm boiling down a complex story, but to make it relatable, he came along and said, "Sire, don't you think it would be good if everyone in your kingdom worshipped your God instead of their own gods? Because if they worship their own gods, they have their own beliefs, they have their own priesthoods, they have their own ideas, authorities, news agencies. You're not really governing them, are you? But if it's all the same God, and your high priest, then we're pulling the kingdom together. You're quite right," says Hezekiah. "They should all worship my God." They stamped out the old religions, they demolished the old temples, they slaughtered the priesthoods, they burned the scriptures, they deleted the old knowledge and replaced it with Catholic orthodoxy. And so this cultural cringe was brought in order to disempower the old stories so that they are just superstition and only to be laughed at. And Christian orthodoxy and modern science, that's the narrative we're all going to listen to. And I think in the Bible, for instance, when we read stories of paleo contact and translate them as if they're God stories, we are robbing ourselves of what the writers actually wanted to tell us. And we realized that our ancestors were giving us a very broad education in the way the world works. The biblical writers are there teaching us about the dangers of covert government, the persistence of old powers, hidden hands in our economics and politics. All those lessons are lost the moment we translate the Elohim stories as if they were a God story. Put Elohim back into the plural, and there's this rich education designed to help us be more empowered and engage more intelligently with all the things happening around us in the present day. So we've got translators who in the 6th century BCE took these stories about invasion and colonization by non-human others and turned them into God stories. So there's that big distortion that happens right there. And then you've got the how it's preached. So this goes right to the question of chosen people and how does that make sense? If you read Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32, it describes a moment just after the invasion of the Elohim. Now, the Elohim is a word that means the powerful ones. It's often translated as God in the singular, but it's really a plural. It means the powerful ones. It's the Hebrew word for Anunnaki. The Elohim's arrival is described as the arrival of the Tseva Hashemayim. That's the flying armies, the airborne armies. And they form what was called the El Ba'adat, the Council of Power. And the Council of Power was chaired by an entity, not Yahweh, an entity called El Elyon, which is a title. It means the powerful one more senior than the others. Mm-hmm. And in those texts I described, he carves up the land and he says to this Elohim, there's your land, you own the resources under that land and the people who live on it. Mm-hmm. Another parcel of land goes to this Elohim. Okay, Dagon, you've got this portion of land, the people who live on it, the resources under it. That frames everything that happens in the Hebrew scriptures. None of it makes sense until you realize that's how it happened in the beginning. But of course, preachers haven't preached it that way. You and I, we go back to the text, read the Greek, read the Hebrew, and we will recognize straight away what we're being told, because we have the concept, a hole in the sky with craft coming through it. That's a portal, that's a wormhole technology. We recognize a rocket that's launching and landing vertically. We can see Elon Musk can do it. Well, somebody could do it in the book of Exodus as well. Yeah. Because when we go back with different experiences and different vocabulary in our own thought world, those texts open up, and sometimes it's stark staringly obvious what's being described to us, and it is technology.
Absolutely. It's technology for sure. Like I said earlier, we have the vocabulary now, the expanded vocabulary, whereas they didn't. What's also very interesting is that the way that the information for us today had been preserved mostly in stone and in documents that are very hard to erode, it's almost as if they knew it would survive or had a good chance to survive far into the future, that future generations like us right now today would be able to get access to this information, break it down, and actually understand what was being said or what was being transmitted to us. And we're here. I mean, this literally is the age of information and enlightenment. And so ignorance is an absolute choice, right?
That's exactly right. And in fact, the 6th book in the Eden series is looking at symbology that was carved into basalt in the Bronze Age. Now, today we would use diamond grade or tungsten carbide tools if we wanted to carve things into basalt. So you know that a huge effort was taken to get this information into basalt by artists who knew that that information would outlast their own civilization. It would last for thousands of years. And so clearly what they put in that was intended as a time capsule to explain something incredibly important about the human story and the history of our planet.